So today's video is kind of a special one for me anyways. It's been 2 years since I moved out here. Actually, the end of June was 2 years and been completely off grid and either might have to haul water or I've been living off of rainwater, mostly rainwater this last year because we had such a good monsoon. So just wanted to talk to people about some of the things I've learned being 2 years off grid now. I'm in a pretty harsh environment here in southern Arizona, southeast, closer to Douglas. I'm not that close to Douglas, but that just gives you some idea of where we are on the map here. I'm in Cochise County, and so summers are really hot. The winters can be, it gets fairly cold in the winter here for a desert, surprisingly. And, when we get monsoons, the monsoons can be pretty nasty. So overall, it's a pretty harsh environment here. Anybody would agree with me, I think. It's not Alaska, but we have our own problems here that I think Alaskans would have a tough time dealing with as I would moving to Alaska. So I would put it up there in that extreme category, but just on a different side of things. So, but I couldn't survive in Alaska. So, anyways, let's start with one of the first things that I had to learn the hard way out here. And the first thing I learned going off grid is that running a generator is super expensive. That's right, folks. I know. So you may be like, wow, that's what you learned. I mean, but I'll tell you what, the first thing you learn when you start doing this is that gas is expensive, especially during that time. That's when stuff started getting really weird and prices started going all over the place. And it was a very unsure time for people. So I learned right away that you need to have an alternative energy source ASAP. Otherwise, you will just get destroyed by gas prices. Running a generator to power whatever it is you're powering, let's put it this way. If you try to mimic the way you live in the city, all right, which I will strongly advise against doing if you're going to live this lifestyle. But if you try to mimic what you have there, AC running 24/7, constant electricity, lights on, not paying attention to anything, you will go broke. You'll pay just as much in gas, more in gas than you would for your electric bill living in the city. Okay, that's how real it is. That's how expensive it can be running a generator. So don't let anybody fool you, folks. If you try to mimic it, the only reason people say, "Well, I save so much money living off grid. I don't pay for nothing." That's not true. They just have changed their lifestyle to a point where they don't need as much, which I think is great. The less you need, the richer you are. That's the way I like to live. I mean, so instead of trying to get more of something, I try to need less of it, if that makes sense. And that's another thing that being off grid has taught me and living this lifestyle, is that I have learned to need a lot less and live a little bit of a rougher lifestyle, I guess you would say. But it's taught me to not desire as much, and it makes me not have to use as many resources and spend so much money. So that's another thing I've learned. Okay, another thing I've learned, and this is really key to the desert, and so it may not apply to some people. Water. Obviously, water should be number one on my list, but I already knew that because I've lived in the desert for 20 some years before. So I already knew it, but you take it for granted. When you live off grid and you don't have a municipal water supply, it gets real quick. You have to really be smart with your water usage. You've got to recycle your gray water. You have to watch what you're doing because, water out here, I don't have a well. One of the things that people have out here in the desert is they will spend a good chunk of money when they move off grid to purchase a well. And wells, they're not cheap out here. And for where I'm at, it's about 350 feet down to dig a well. And, all the quotes that we were getting ranged anywhere from, they were all over the map, but they were like 20,000 to 40,000 to have a well dug out here. Okay. And so my wife and I, we've thrown it around. We still may end up doing a well. I don't know yet, but right now I've been living off of rainwater and I don't even have a lot of catchment setups out here yet. I've been doing surface water and then filtering it, but water is a big deal here and you can't survive without it. So you need to have a water plan. You have to have storage for your water. That's key. So obviously, some of these things may seem obvious, but they become very obvious when you live like I've been living out here. Now I look like I'm living in a really cushy area here, but I've spent a lot of time and effort building this up like this. So, and this building here is completely off grid. It's all running off of solar. So there's that. Um, Being off grid can be pretty expensive, and I know there's so many people that make channels on YouTube talking about how cheap living off grid is and how frugal lifestyle, and it's not that I disagree. I don't think, put this way, if you're by yourself and you can, dictate your own terms of how you want to do things, um, you can get away with just kind of patching things together to make it work. And I've done that out here where I use pallets just to build stuff and scrap material, and it can be done. But this is a very important lesson that you need to know, okay? And it really starts to become very real after a couple years, and you start questioning things. The amount of time that you're going to spend building alternatively, whether it be earth bag buildings, building with pallets, building with scrap materials, building this, building that. Two things. Number one, it's not going to be as good of quality as traditional building. It just isn't, okay? I've been in both sides. I've been in the trades for a long time. I'm very familiar with building, and I'll tell you, you can't build as good with pallets as you can, traditionally. You can build a lot cheaper, but that comes with some caveats. Number one, it's going to take you a lot more time. It's just that simple. It takes a lot more time to build that way. So when you're doing like 5, 10 different projects and you're trying to build a house in the desert or you're trying to live a lifestyle like this, you have to make decisions. You have to decide one of two routes. You have to say, I'm going to live a simple lifestyle. And then in that situation, you can live in a shed and just, set up whatever you need for your gardening and animals, and you can be done with it. And everything else is just kind of icing on the cake at that point. That's one way to live. There's a lot of people that go that route, and I'm cool with that. I would do that if I were by myself. However, I have my wife. We have one more son living with us right now. And, when you're married to somebody, I've been married to my wife for over 21 years now. And there's a certain point where we can make compromises with each other, but there's also certain things where my wife is not going to compromise on certain things, and that's her right. She didn't ask to do this. So for her, she came along with this, but she said, okay, here's the deal. I need a real shower. I need a real toilet. I need a real bathroom. I need a real place to live. I'm not going to live in a shed. And I know to some people that might sound snobby, and you might say, wow, well, boo hoo. And I understand, okay, but I'm telling you, that doesn't mean anything. My wife is one of the toughest people I've ever met. In fact, I met my wife when I was a pro fighter, and she was entered a jiu-jitsu tournament in an all-guys division and tapped everybody out at that division. She's a lightweight, but still, she was, 120 some pounds, but she went in the men's division and beat everybody. Okay, so the reason I'm telling you that is because she's a very tough person. She kicks ass at her job. She has a really good career, but there's just certain things in life that some people just don't want to do. It's not a matter of being tough or not. It's saying, hey, I live. I make good money. I've worked hard in my career. I don't want to do it this way. I'm not going to live like that, at least for me, because I don't want to. So that's where, if you're married and you guys, you better hash this out before you start moving off grid, because I'm telling you, it will come to a head soon, and you're going to see what I'm talking about. If this is for the married folks out there. If you're single, it's, you know what? It's all up to you. And there's loneliness you got to deal with. I'm pretty lonely out here because I don't see my wife very much. I mean, I was used to live with my wife day in, day out, and you take it for granted. And now, she, until this house is built, she's like, I'm not living out there. So I've been out here building. And so, I see her once a week. We still have a really good relationship. It's not like anything's different. We've worked apart, traveled, that kind of stuff, and have to be apart from each other. So and it's not that she's that far away, So anytime I want, I can just drive into Tucson and see her. So, um, yeah. So I'm not trying to diverge too far from what I've learned, but it has taught me some things about compromising. It's also taught me that you need to hash out these things with the person you're with to make sure that you both are really on the same page, not just saying yes, but really understand what the other person is asking of you. So there's that. Okay, another thing I've learned living off grid for 2 years. Infrastructure is pretty damn important. Rodents are a big problem out here. I don't know if it's like this everywhere else, but man, you would be amazed if you haven't dealt with rodents, the amount of freaking problems these things can cause and the amount of damage they can cause. Rodents are a thing here. And I got to tell you, man, they really gave me a tough time for a few months. It's been recent that this has happened, and we just had infestation, man. If you get a rodent infestation, everything stops, okay? Because that shit will be on your mind 24/7. You'll hear them gnawing in the walls. You'll hear them gnawing it. You'll see stuff like shit everywhere. You'll see them, destroying your plants. They get to your animal food. They get into everything. They get into your truck. I've had them in my making nests multiple times in my truck hood. I have to keep the hood up on my truck if I don't want them building nests in there, okay? So rodents are a problem, and you need to have a plan for rodents if you're going to live in the desert, all right? I've talked to other people. I'm not the only one. This is a real deal out here with that. And so I had some rodent issues. So there you go. Another thing I've learned. You got to deal with the rodents and you got to keep up on them. Let's see. Another thing that I've learned. Well, I've learned this. There's a lot of people in the trades will know what I'm talking about. If you think a job is going to take 3 days, it's going to take six. If you think it's going to cost you $100, it's probably going to cost you $250. Now, I'm not saying that to be negative. You may not want to hear that, but I'm telling you, we have this thing in our brains where we like to be super optimistic sometimes if you're an optimistic person, and you almost lie to yourself and you'll almost be like, nah, I could do it for this. Oh, it'll only take me a couple days. Rarely do I have projects out here that work out that way. Once in a great while, but honestly, it's because I usually buy most of it or something or have someone else do it. But unless you're willing to pay a lot of money, you're going to be doing a lot of things on your own, especially if you live out in the middle of nowhere. So know that, okay? Allocate your time accordingly and say, all right, I think it's going to take a day, so I'm going to give myself 3 days to do this, and I'm going to budget 3 times as much as I think it's going to cost. I know you don't want to hear it, but it's the truth. All right. So, another thing that I've learned out here is that here's another thing. You got to be careful taking on too many projects, okay? You got to learn to delegate your time. This is not going to be a picnic out here. Unless you have the money to buy everything, you're going to have to do a lot of things by yourself. And you have to know that you are one person, or even if you have a family, and there's only so much you can do in a day. So that's where that time thing comes back to you, is that you'll burn out. I've burnt out more than once where I've had to take a few days off because I have just worked myself to the ground. And I can't stress that enough. This is not easy to do. Okay. This is a level, on level 1 to 10, I give this about a level 7, okay, on the toughness scale. This is not simple to do. There's so much stuff you got to deal with, and if you're not mentally prepared for it, it can crush you. It crushes a lot of people out here. A lot of people pack it up. It's just not for them, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they learn that the hard way after they've invested lots of money and time into it. So, okay, another thing, if you're going to be off grid, a lot of times you're going to be very rural. And if you're not used to living rural, there's a lot of things that are going to change for you from living in the city. And one of the things that's going to change is getting people to do things is really difficult out here. Hiring people to do things is difficult. It's more expensive because there's no competition out here. Okay. So if you've got a septic guy, you may have in a city, man, you might have, I don't know, I'm just talking here. You might have 100 people that do septic work or whatever. Out here, you got five, okay? And they're all priced in line with each other. They have no competition out here, so, and they got to travel and all that, but the prices are just more expensive. And it's like that with everything out here. It's very frustrating. Jobs in the city, you would get a lot more competition because you would have more people to send the quotes to and you could get bids on it and you could say, this guy's way out of the line here. This guy here is a little too low. Something's going on there. So, usually I try to look in the middle somewhere and see whether the quotes are and then look at their reputation, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard to do that out here because you don't have that many people to pull from. And, some of it I got to pull from the city to get them to come out here and they're still cheaper. So sometimes that's something you need to be aware of if you're going to be building off grid. It's something that you got to know. Okay, so I'll move right into the next thing. This is a long video. I'm hopefully going to edit it down a bit for you. But so another thing that I've learned living off grid is I knew this pretty good because I did my due diligence, but a lot of people don't do this enough. You need to know your zoning and regulations when you live in an off-grid area, and you got to know if you're even allowed to do things, and be very careful who you share your information with, because the thing is that you may think that you could build things the way you want to build them, and you can until you get caught. And if you get caught, there's repercussions for that. Look, I'm not on the side with these counties or government. Fuck them. I don't care about them. I want them to stay out of my business. I think people should be able to do what the hell they want. So that being said, that's not what it's about. To me, it's about taking care of yourself and protecting yourself. Because if you don't do your research, you're going to end up in a situation where you may get fined for something. You may end up having to tear something down you put all this work into. So you got to be careful with that. I live in a county that's very relaxed on things, but you still, even then, you got to be careful. The last thing I'm going to say is, and I've said this in multiple videos, get to know your neighbors and make good relationships with your neighbors. I cannot tell you how many times I've read posts on Facebook and all these forums about people having problems with their neighbors, and because they may live a mile up the road from you, but guess what? When you're the only thing around, they see everything you do, more so than in the city. That's a surprise for a lot of people. What you're going to know is that both of my neighbors that live pretty far away from me know my business. They know what I'm doing. Dwayne was out on his tractor the other day. He's digging something. Or Dwayne's building something over there. You know what I mean? And luckily for me, I got very cool neighbors, and I have a good relationship with my neighbors. One of my neighbors is really sick right now, but I've been meaning to check on him, but I don't want to bother him. But he's in his late 70s. But so anyways, another neighbor, I hire him to do things for me sometimes and stuff. So, but they know your business, so if you have a bad relationship with your neighbors, it will ruin your whole off-grid experience when you live off-grid. It will. I've heard it a million times. People, part of the problem is people buy something. They buy land, okay? And when you buy something, this is just normal behavior. You have this sense of entitlement when you buy something, in your head anyways. You go, you know what? That's mine. I own it. I worked hard. I paid for it. I had to put the work in to get it. It's mine, or it's ours. But what they don't do sometimes when people move off grid and they go to their property, this is a little rule of thumb, and I kind of came up with this on my own. You might be super stoked that you bought this off-grid property and you're so happy to be out there. But that doesn't mean that your neighbors who've been used to being by themselves for 15 years are going to be happy that you came, okay? Because you're going to be like, damn it, man, I got a neighbor. I mean, think about it. One of the reasons you're moving out of the city in the first place is probably to get away from people or to have your own space, right? So you got to remember that. Going into it, the mindset, and you have to say to yourself, okay, before I just cut this lock off this gate, even though it's on my property, you might want to have a good conversation, get to know your neighbor, be humble, get to know them and understand before you jump to conclusions and start being an asshole, because approach determines response. And if you approach somebody in a way with a stick up your ass, you may not even know it that you're that person. But if you're a city person and you're used to dealing in the city, I mean, yeah, in the city, man, there's more competition. There's a lot of things in the city, man, that make you have to act a certain way. But when you live in rural areas, it's different and the mindset's different, and people don't take kindly to that stuff. So if you come out with an attitude and you start, puffing your chest out and saying, "Hey, this is on my property," and you cut the damn lock, and just start doing your thing, well, guess what? There might be a reason, even if that is your property. They might have put a lock on that gate because four-wheelers come in and out of there if they don't, and you're going to have ATVs running all over your shit. And they were doing that to keep them out. Or you might have cows, for example. I live in an open range area, that if you don't lock that gate, these cows are coming in and out. Or whatever the reason. Okay, so get to know your neighbors. I can't emphasize that enough. I've seen it time and time again, people having these problems. And I got to tell you, 50% of the time, it's because of the people, the way they approach the problem, in my opinion. I'm like, yeah, it sounds to me, though, like you just kind of went in there, guns a-blazing, and, just didn't have any respect for them. Because, and so for me, I took it a little differently. I grew up rural, so I kind of knew, before I moved out here, I was like, all right, first step, get to know my neighbors, let them know what I'm doing out here. They're going to find out anyways. So, I tell them, yeah, I'm buying property here. We bought property here. We're going to be building a house. We just want to live off grid, have a farm. Miss my wife, Teresa, da 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 da. And before you know it, man, most of the time, it's not always true. I mean, you might just get an asshole, But that's something too when you buy land. That's one more thing, and I'll go. But if you buy land and you've got neighbors around, you might want to get to know them before you buy the property. I'm serious, because they may be such assholes that you go to talk to these people and they could be a nightmare. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong on this. If you live rural, I've had neighbors growing up, and man, they were in town. Everybody knew, like, dude, stay away. That sucks if you got to live next to that guy. He's just a freaking pain in the ass, and it ruins it for everybody. But there might be a reason why that land's vacant, and it sucks that people can dictate that stuff. But, I guess at that point, you got to decide, well, am I going to deal with this guy? And if I'm going to deal with this guy, maybe I need to build quite a big fence. And if I got to build a quick big fence, I'm going to be spending some money. So if you got the money, you could shut them out and just be like, I don't care. I will buy out any of this area here, and I don't have to deal with this dude or this woman or couple or whatever. Okay, I mean, you see these on stories and podcasts, man. These neighbors, I mean, they'll kill each other sometimes over stuff like this, just so petty. So, yeah, get to know your neighbors. Anyways, 2 years off grid. Drinking a lot of coffee this morning, so I'm pretty awake, but I got some stuff going on right now that I got to get back to, and I hope everybody's doing well. Thanks for following. Talk to you soon.